Breaking news this Saturday evening. A Karen just jumped the fence at a police K-9 trainer's house in Meadowbrook Heights. I was training Rex, an 80-pound drum of drug busts, when I heard screaming from my backyard. This wasn't the usual sound of criminals shaking in their boots when they meet a police dog. This was pure Karen rage, and she had just committed trespassing on a federal contractor's property. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I need to know how fast this story spreads through the anti-HOE community. My name is Travis Whitman, and I've been training police dogs for 12 years. When people hear K-9 trainer, they think it's just teaching dogs to sit and stay. Rex isn't just a pet. He once saved Officer Martinez's life during a dangerous drug raid. These dogs are warriors, not house pets. They put their lives on the line every day to keep our communities safe. And that's exactly what I was teaching them in my professionally equipped backyard training facility that afternoon. The Saturday training session had that perfect feel. Warm sun, the satisfying rhythm of Rex working through his narcotic detection drills. My setup isn't just a few cones and treats. It's a federal rod training ground with specialized equipment that costs more than most people's cars. For the past week, I'd noticed this blonde woman in designer clothes lingering near my fence during sessions, taking pictures and making notes. I figured she was just a curious neighbor until she decided to escalate things to a level I never saw coming. At exactly 3:15 p.m., while Rex was demonstrating his explosive detection skills, my motion sensors went off. Someone was climbing my 6-foot privacy fence. What landed in my backyard wasn't a curious kid. It was a 40-something woman in a designer pantsuit carrying a decibel meter and professional camera equipment. "Excuse me," she shrieked, pointing that meter at Rex like a weapon. "I'm Deborah Clifton, president of the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association." She started snapping photos frantically, the camera flash startling my dogs out of their training focus. Rex, being the professional he is, simply sat and watched this bizarre behavior with calm curiosity. Thunder and Diesel looked to me for guidance, ears perked and ready for whatever command came next. I was trying to process what I was witnessing. This woman had just climbed my fence, entered my property without permission, and was acting like she owned the place. "Ma'am," I said, using the same tone I'd used with an agitated suspect, "you're trespassing on private property. I need you to leave immediately." But Deborah wasn't listening. She was measuring decibel levels and muttering about property values. "These dangerous animals are creating excessive noise," she declared, ignoring that it was mid-afternoon on a weekend. "I'm issuing you a $500 fine and demanding immediate removal of these beasts from our family-friendly community." I tried explaining my federal contractor status, my proper permits, that these were professionally trained police K-9s. She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "I don't care about your government nonsense. This is an HOA community and we have standards. My first mistake was thinking this could be resolved through proper channels. Mrs. Clifton, I'll send an email to the HOA board explaining the situation. I'm sure we can work this out like reasonable adults." Her eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. "Oh, you'll be hearing from us all right," she said, climbing back over my fence with surprising agility. As I watched her disappear into her oversized SUV, I had this nagging feeling that I just made a tactical error. In the military, showing weakness only invites more aggression. But this was suburbia, not a combat zone. I was about to learn that in this HOA, the law was Karen, at least until I discovered what the real law actually was. 3 days later, my mailbox looked like a bureaucratic hurricane had hit it. Instead of one response to my polite email, I received 4 separate violation notices totaling $2,000. Excessive noise, $500. Dangerous animals, $750. The accusations read like suburban pettiness turned into legal warfare. As I stood there reading these official documents, I felt my orderly world collapsing in slow motion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war, and I'd been too naive to see it coming. My emotions cycled rapidly from confusion to frustration to cold, calculating anger. How could someone look at my legitimate business and see violations? The noise citation claimed I was disturbing regulation quiet hours during weekend afternoons. The dangerous animal report described Rex, Thunder, and Diesel as vicious beasts when these dogs had never even growled at a neighbor child. My carefully written email explaining my federal status and proper permits had been completely ignored. I called my old partner from the police academy, Detective Mike Rodriguez, who dealt with similar suburban politics. When I explained the situation, his response wasn't reassuring. "Travis, my friend, you've stepped into a different kind of war zone. HOA Karens can be more dangerous than armed suspects because they have the law on their side, at least their version of it." Mike's advice was simple but sobering. Document everything, record every interaction, and whatever you do, don't let them see you sweat. This is an underground battlefield and they know how to use the system like career criminals. The phone number on the violations connected directly to Deborah's personal cell, HOA enforcement. "President Clifton speaking." She answered with artificial sweetness that put me on guard. "This is Travis Whitman about these violation notices. I believe there's been a mistake." The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then came a chuckle of pure malice. "No mistake, Mr. Whitman. You're running illegal operations, harboring dangerous animals, and violating community standards." Her voice shifted to ice-cold authority. "I am the law in this neighborhood. Your federal permits don't override HOA regulations." During our video call, I caught glimpses of her background that didn't add up. A designer handbag worth at least $3,000. Expensive certificates arranged like military medals. Most telling was her casual comment about HOA fines helping maintain property values. And my lifestyle, the emphasis on my lifestyle, with obvious satisfaction, sent warning bells ringing in my military-trained mind. This wasn't about community standards. Something else was driving her behavior, and I was starting to suspect what that might be. "You have 72 hours to comply or face escalating fines and legal action that will force you out of this community," she declared with finality. "Cease all illegal operations, remove the dangerous animals, and bring your property into compliance." As I hung up, I realized Mike's warning about HOA wars being more dangerous than armed conflicts wasn't hyperbole. At least with criminals, you knew the rules and what they wanted. This was something else entirely. Unlimited power given to whoever held the clipboard with no meaningful oversight or appeal process. In this HOA, the law wasn't about justice or fairness. The law was whatever Karen said it was. And I was about to learn just how ruthless Karen could be when someone dared challenge her authority. Time to activate full reconnaissance mode. 12 years of military training and federal contract work had taught me more than a few things about surveillance and intelligence gathering. If Deborah wanted to play games, she had picked the absolute wrong opponent. I started by installing completely legal security cameras around my property, including some high-end night vision capabilities that could document neighborhood activity 24 hours a day. Within just a few days, I had accumulated more footage of actual HOA violations than she had documented fake ones in months of harassment. My daily 6 a.m. intelligence gathering sessions revealed the full extent of Deborah's breathtaking hypocrisy. Those weeds in her flower beds weren't just a minor oversight. They were a full-scale property value nightmare that would have earned any other resident a $500 fine. Her Tuesday and Thursday overnight parking pattern violated Section 12.7 of the exact same regulations she'd cited against another neighbor just last month. Most entertaining of all was watching her hang laundry outside to dry every Wednesday morning, which was explicitly banned on page 47, Section 12. 3 of the very bylaws she wielded like a weapon against everyone else. But I needed to get creative with my surveillance to avoid detection. I started taking casual walks with Rex around the neighborhood, using the training sessions as cover while I documented violations with my phone. One morning, I pretended to be filming training videos for social media while actually recording Deborah parking legally. Another time, I had to dive behind a tree when she suddenly turned around during one of her weed pulling sessions, almost catching me documenting her landscaping violations. The whole thing felt ridiculous. A grown man playing hide and seek with a suburban dictator. But the evidence I was gathering was solid gold. The real breakthrough came from observing her spending patterns and lifestyle changes. During my systematic surveillance, I started noticing purchases and behaviors that didn't add up for someone living on a small-town lawyer's salary, new luxury SUV lease payments on a vehicle that retailed for over $60,000. Regular spa treatments at the most expensive salon in the county. Shopping bags from high-end stores that suggested a lifestyle well beyond what her husband's modest law practice should be able to support. The timeline was particularly fascinating. These expensive purchases seemed to coincide perfectly with her major violation campaigns throughout the neighborhood. The smoking gun came during an overheard phone conversation while she was conducting one of her daily property patrols. Standing just close enough to my fence to eavesdrop without being detected, I heard her talking to someone about covering monthly expenses. "The fine money covers it perfectly," she said with a laugh that made my blood run cold. "They never check the HOA books anyway, so it's basically free money." That single sentence changed everything I thought I knew about this situation. This wasn't about property values, community standards, or even power tripping. This was about personal profit. Deborah was running a sophisticated shakedown operation using HOA regulations as her legal cover, and she was funding her increasingly expensive lifestyle with money extorted from her own neighbors. The community was responding exactly as she had calculated they would. My neighbor Tom Bradley had been walking on eggshells ever since her campaign against me started, and I could see the tension radiating through his entire household, through their kitchen window. During my evening surveillance walks, I witnessed heated arguments between Tom and his wife, Linda, that were becoming increasingly frequent and intense. One evening, their dispute got loud enough for me to overhear from the sidewalk. "Tom, this is morally wrong. You know she's lying, and you need to stand up to her," Linda shouted. His response was barely audible, but devastating. "What if she decides to target us next? What about our property values? What about our kids' safety?" The fear was spreading through our neighborhood like a virus, and Deborah was patient zero in this epidemic of suburban terror. Things escalated dramatically when I received a certified letter threatening a $10,000 lien against my property. Deborah claimed that I had intimidated her with attack dogs and that she now felt unsafe in her own neighborhood. Because of my dangerous animals and allegedly aggressive behavior toward HOA leadership, the legal language was sophisticated enough to suggest she'd gotten professional help, probably from her husband's law firm. But something about the desperate timing and increasingly hysterical tone told me I was getting dangerously close to something she desperately wanted to keep hidden from the community. My emotions were shifting from simple anger to full strategic thinking mode. If you're thinking right now, Travis, don't escalate this situation any further. Well, you're absolutely right, and I thought the exact same thing initially. But sometimes in life, you reach a point where backing down simply isn't an option anymore, where retreat means letting evil win and innocent people suffer. Deborah thought she was hunting a simple dog trainer who would eventually roll over and comply with her increasingly outrageous demands. She had absolutely no idea that she had just provoked a federal contractor with extensive military surveillance training and a very particular set of skills. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and she didn't have the slightest clue what was coming for her. Planning a suburban sting operation required adapting military tactics to an environment where enemies wore designer clothes instead of combat gear. The fundamental principles remain the same. Know your target's weaknesses, create irresistible bait, and let them make the critical mistake that exposes their true nature. I needed Deborah to overplay her hand in a way that would be legally actionable and impossible to spin into victimhood. Setting up the trap required careful preparation that would make any military strategist proud. I spent a day transforming my backyard into what would appear to be a high-stakes operation. Additional remote-controlled lighting that could be activated from inside the house. Official-looking equipment cases positioned strategically around the training area, and multiple camera angles positioned to capture everything from different perspectives. The goal was creating a scenario irresistible to someone convinced they were about to catch me in major violations that would justify everything they'd done. During a phone conversation near my fence line, I mentioned a special evening training session with a high-value federal client, talking about substantial cash payments and extensive nighttime activity that would run well past normal hours. If someone was eavesdropping, and I knew they were, they'd hear exactly what I wanted. an opportunity to catch me in what sounded like major commercial violations that would vindicate her entire campaign against me. For 2 agonizing days, nothing happened. I started wondering if Deborah was more cautious than expected, or if maybe she sensed something was off about the timing and circumstances. Maybe the stakes weren't high enough to risk another trespassing incident. But then I noticed her conducting longer surveillance sessions, staying later each evening, obviously wrestling with the decision. Her hesitation actually made me more confident. It showed she knew what she was doing was wrong, but her greed and need for control were stronger than her common sense. Officer Riley Thompson had worked with me on enough K-9 programs that I trusted her completely, but I also knew she had to protect her professional integrity. "I can't be directly involved in any kind of setup," she told me during our planning conversation. "But if I happen to be conducting routine patrol duties in the neighborhood and witness criminal activity in progress, that's just good community policing." Her timing would need to be perfect, and everything would have to be completely legitimate and by the book. At 9 p.m. sharp, with all cameras recording and Riley positioned for her routine patrol nearby, I began what appeared to be an intensive training session in my backyard. The reality was that Rex, Thunder, and Diesel were just going through their normal evening routines. But with strategic lighting and careful positioning, it looked significant and potentially secretive. The dogs seemed to sense the importance of the situation. They were more alert than usual, constantly scanning the perimeter like they were expecting something to happen. At 9:37 p.m. exactly, my motion sensors detected someone climbing my fence. Deborah had taken the bait completely, and she'd come prepared for what she obviously thought would be the violation bust of the century. Professional photography equipment, including telephoto lenses, external flash units, recording devices, and what looked like night vision capability. She'd clearly planned this operation carefully, but not nearly carefully enough for someone going up against military-trained opposition. My 3 K-9 units detected the intruder the moment she hit the ground, responding exactly as they'd been trained for real tactical situations. Rex moved to cut off her retreat route back to the fence. Thunder positioned himself to block any forward movement toward the house. Diesel took a flanking position to prevent lateral movement along the fence line. It was textbook containment protocol executed by dogs who'd done this hundreds of times in actual law enforcement situations. 3 police dogs locked down all escape routes like a professional tactical team. Deborah stood frozen in the middle of my backyard, eyes wide like a burglar who just walked into a tiger trap. Her scream of panic and outrage brought Riley running from her patrol position, and suddenly my backyard transformed into a crime scene, blazing with police flashlights, camera equipment, and the surreal sight of an HOA president surrounded by police dogs while trying to explain why she was trespassing with what any reasonable prosecutor would classify as burglary tools. "Ma'am, I need you to slowly put down that equipment and explain what you're doing on this property," Riley said in her official police voice, hand resting professionally on her radio. Deborah's attempted justification was pure care, and logic at its most disconnected from reality. "I'm protecting this community from illegal operations. This man is running dangerous activities that threaten our families, and I have every right to document violations and ensure compliance with community standards." The irony was breathtaking. She was standing on my property at 9:37 p.m. with professional surveillance equipment, surrounded by police dogs and an unformed officer. Yet she still genuinely believed she was the victim of the situation, rather than the perpetrator of multiple felonies. My body cameras and security system captured everything from multiple angles. Her illegal entry onto my property, her professional surveillance equipment that suggested premeditation, her complete inability to recognize that she was the one breaking the law, and most importantly, her own words admitting that she'd been conducting systematic surveillance and harassment of my legitimate business operations. When Riley calmly explained that formal criminal charges would be filed and that she needed to be processed at the station, Deborah's response was to threaten Riley with complaints to the police chief and demands that I be arrested for intimidation and entrapment. The satisfaction I felt at that moment was unlike anything I had experienced since leaving the military service. It was the pure, clean feeling of a well-accepted operation that had achieved exactly the tactical results I'd planned for. Strategic thinking had overcome bullying tactics. patience and discipline had triumphed over aggression and intimidation, and truth was finally going to have its day in court with proper legal documentation. What I didn't realize was that Karen possessed one more superpower that I'd seriously underestimated: the supernatural ability to transform any situation, no matter how damning or legally compromising, into irrefutable evidence of her own victimization. The real battle was just beginning. Within 24 hours of her arrest, Deborah had completely rewritten history. The woman caught trespassing with surveillance equipment was now the innocent victim of a vicious attack by dangerous animals and their unstable owner. Her transformation from perpetrator to victim was so skillfully executed that I had to admire the tactical brilliance even as it threatened to destroy everything I'd worked for. Her social media campaign was manipulation at its finest. Carefully edited photos showing injuries from climbing my fence, dramatic descriptions of being terrorized by attack dogs trained to kill. Her written account read like a horror movie script about feeling unsafe in her own neighborhood because of my aggressive behavior toward HOA leadership. She hired an independent attorney, not her husband's firm, which I found interesting, and filed a comprehensive lawsuit seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages for deliberate intimidation. The legal document painted me as someone who'd weaponized police dogs against innocent community officials trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The dollar amount she was seeking would have bankrupted me even if I won the case. But her real genius was mobilizing community support through the Keeping Meebrook Safe group that gained 300 members in 2 days, all sharing photos of children and demanding action against the menace in their neighborhood. The community response split along brutal fault lines I hadn't known existed. The Hendersons, who'd been friendly neighbors for 2 years, suddenly couldn't make eye contact when we passed on the street. Property values became a constant topic of heated discussion at the grocery store anywhere neighbors gathered. Team safety emerged among parents genuinely concerned about police dogs in residential areas, and others simply terrified of becoming Deborah's next target if they didn't support her publicly. The division wasn't just philosophical, it was personal and devastating to longtime relationships. Channel 7's investigative reporter ran a story with the headline, "Dangerous Dogs or HOA Overreach Neighborhood Divided." But the edited footage made the trespassing incident look like I deliberately set up an elaborate trap to terrorize an innocent woman documenting legitimate community concerns. My federal contractor credentials were dismissed as government paperwork that doesn't override local safety concerns. The systematic destruction of my reputation was happening faster than I'd thought possible. The anonymous attacks escalated from petty to genuinely frightening. My mailbox was knocked over with dangerous spray painted on my fence in red letters that looked like blood in the morning light. Garbage was dumped on my driveway, eggs thrown at my house. The phone calls at all hours were psychological warfare. Sometimes heavy breathing, sometimes whispered threats, sometimes just dogs barking at maximum volume until I hung up. Animal Control launched formal investigations into my business operations and licenses. My federal contracts came under review by bureaucrats suddenly concerned about liability issues in community relations. Tom Bradley's household became a microcosm of the community civil war, tearing apart relationships that had existed for years. Through kitchen windows, I could see heated arguments between Tom and Linda, growing more desperate each night. "She's obviously lying, Tom. Use your brain," Linda would shout, her voice carrying across the evening air. Tom's responses grew increasingly defensive and frantic. "But what if the dogs are dangerous? What about our kids, our property values? What if she's right about him being unstable?" The fear was spreading systematically through every household, and I was facing the real possibility of losing not just my home, but my entire career. But cracks appeared in Deborah's victim narrative if you knew what to look for and had skills to spot inconsistencies in cover stories. During one televised interview, her husband Marcus appeared briefly in the background, and instead of looking like a supportive spouse, he seemed uncomfortable and kept glancing away from cameras. At one point, he made a comment the reporter didn't follow up on, but that I caught with my trained ear. "Deborah, maybe dial back the HOA fund usage until this situation settles." The comment was quickly covered by her voice, but I heard it clearly, confirming my suspicions about financial motivations behind her campaigns. The isolation was crushing in ways I hadn't experienced since deployment, At least in combat zones, you knew who your enemies were. This was different. Enemies hiding behind friendly faces. Attacks disguised as community concern. Destruction wrapped in language of safety and property values. There were moments around 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep because of threatening calls that I questioned everything. Maybe I should sell the house, move somewhere else, start over. But somewhere in that darkness, as I watched everything being systematically torn apart by lies and manipulation, final resolve began forming. This wasn't just about one Karen anymore. This was war against a corrupt system that allowed people like Deborah to destroy lives for profit while hiding behind official authority. I was done playing defense. Fighting Deborah's well-funded, professionally orchestrated campaign alone was like trying to stop a tank with a slingshot. I needed allies, resources, and most importantly, I needed to know if she'd left other casualties in her wake who might be willing to stand up and fight back. My research into her previous neighborhood started with simple internet searches, but quickly evolved into a full investigation that revealed a pattern of behavior so consistent and destructive that it qualified as a criminal enterprise operating under the cover of community service. Before Meadowbrook Heights, Deborah had been HOA president at Willow Creek Estates for 3 years, where she'd managed to force out multiple families using tactics almost identical to what she was doing to me. The most heartbreaking case was Dr. Patricia Vance, a veterinarian who'd operated a small animal clinic from her home with all proper permits and licenses. DeBure's campaign against her had been systematic and ruthless. Noise complaints about barking, allegations of unsanitary conditions, claims about property value damage, and escalating fines that eventually totaled over $15,000. Dr. Vans agreed to meet me at a neutral location, a coffee shop in a neighboring town where neither of us would be recognized. She was a woman in her early 60s with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much injustice. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee and began telling me a story that was like looking into a crystal ball of my own future. If I didn't find a way to stop what was happening, she didn't just cost me my practice, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cost me my reputation, my financial security, and nearly my marriage of 35 years. The worst part wasn't losing the clinic or even the money. It was watching neighbors I'd known 15 years, people whose pets I'd saved, turn against me because they were terrified of becoming her next target. I organized what I called the Underground HOA Resistance Meeting, and finding a venue required more creativity than expected. The community center in our town was mysteriously booked solid whenever I tried to reserve it, probably because word had gotten back to Deborah. Finally, I found a church in the neighboring town whose pastor had his own HOA horror stories and was willing to let us use their fellowship hall. The meeting felt like something from a resistance film. Dim lighting, nervous participants, everyone checking over their shoulders to make sure they hadn't been followed. The attendees read like a support group for suburban warfare survivors. Dr. Patricia Vance drove 40 minutes to be there, along with another family from Deborah's previous neighborhood who'd been forced to relocate rather than continue fighting her system. 3 current neighbors from Meadowbrook Heights showed up despite obvious risks. Mrs. Patterson, the Johnsons, and surprisingly, Linda Bradley, who came without her husband Tom's knowledge. Most valuable was Frank Morrison, a former HOA board member who'd resigned rather than participate in what he called Deborah's shakedown operation. Officer Riley Thompson provided off-duty assistance with proper legal documentation of everything we discussed. Her investigative skills were invaluable in organizing evidence and testimonies that would hold up under legal scrutiny. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in HOA corruption cases, explained that what we were documenting wasn't just civil rights violations, but organized financial fraud using municipal authority as cover, which made it a federal crime under RICO statutes. The financial investigation revealed patterns that were shocking in their brazenness. $47,000 in unexplained deposits into Deborah's personal accounts, correlating exactly with her major violation campaigns. Frank Morrison provided the missing piece explaining how she'd gotten away with it for so long. The HOA fund had never been properly audited, and board members who asked questions about finances were systematically removed through procedural maneuvers or intimidated into silence. She controlled the books, the meetings, and the narrative about proper financial management. Anyone challenging her was labeled as someone who didn't care about property values or community standards. But our coalition wasn't without internal friction that threatened to tear it apart before we could accomplish anything meaningful. Jerry Walsh, one of the families from her previous neighborhood, was terrified that fighting back would only make things worse. What if she comes after us again? What if we're just giving her more targets? What if we end up losing even more than we already have? His fears weren't unreasonable. Deborah had proven she was willing to destroy lives to protect her system. It took Dr. Patricia Vance's passionate speech to convince him that hiding wasn't a viable strategy anymore. "Jerry, I understand your fear because I lived it for 3 years," she said, standing and addressing the room with authority of someone who'd survived the worst. "But we have to stop her, not just for ourselves, but for all the families she'll destroy if we don't. She won't stop until someone forces her to stop." Local investigative journalist Sarah Martinez became interested in our story after Dr. Vance reached out about broader patterns of HOA abuse in our region. Sarah had been covering municipal corruption for 8 years and immediately recognized the significance of what we were documenting. The emotional journey from desperation to hope to confident determination felt like coming back to life after a long, debilitating illness. For the first time in months, I was fighting with adequate weapons against an opponent who wasn't invincible. Tomorrow night's final HOA meeting would either reclaim my life and help expose a corrupt system destroying communities across the region, or Deborah would win and continue her reign of terror with added confidence that even organized resistance couldn't stop her. But at least now, I wouldn't be fighting alone. In this HOA, the law might have been Karen up until now, but that was only true as long as we didn't know what the real law actually was. The final HOA meeting looked like a courtroom drama had collided head-on with a town hall uprising and produced something unprecedented in suburban history. The community center was packed far beyond its official capacity, with neighbors, media representatives, legal observers, curious residents from other HOA communities who had heard about our situation, and even some city council members who were concerned about the broader implications of HOA corruption in residential areas. The air was thick with years of suppressed frustration, fear, and anger that was finally bubbling to the surface after being forced underground for so long. You could feel the tension in every detail of the scene. People were dressed more formally than usual, like they understood this was a historic moment that would determine the future of their community. Some clutched folders full of their own documentation. Others held signs supporting various sides of the conflict. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone's faces look drawn and serious. Conversations were happening in hushed, urgent tones, and you could see neighbors who hadn't spoken in months trying to figure out where everyone else stood on the issues. Deborah arrived fashionably late in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, accompanied by her expensive lawyer and carrying professional presentation equipment that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a community center. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had won dozens of these battles before and fully expected to win this one as well. Her perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and coordinated accessories projected an image of authority and respectability that had fooled communities for years. Her presentation was theatrical manipulation elevated to an art form. Using a professional slideshow complete with dramatic photographs, statistical charts, and carefully edited video footage, she recounted what she called the dangerous dog crisis with the skill and emotional manipulation of a prosecutor presenting a capital murder case. She described my dogs as vicious threats to community safety, showed carefully edited photos of property damage that she claimed resulted from my illegal business operations, and made heart-wrenching emotional appeals about protecting innocent children and preserving family values in residential neighborhoods. Her voice broke at precisely the right moments. Her gestures were perfectly timed for maximum emotional impact, and her demands for my immediate removal from the community were delivered with the kind of righteous indignation that had probably swayed countless HOA boards and community meetings in the past. She even managed to produce what appeared to be testimonials from concerned parents and elderly residents. though I noticed that several of these people seemed to be reading from prepared scripts rather than speaking from personal experience. But Deborah had saved her most manipulative performance trick for the climactic moment of her presentation midway through her detailed accusations against me. She suddenly clutched her chest and claimed to feel faint, describing stress-induced health issues that she attributed directly to months of harassment, intimidation, and fear for her personal safety. It was obviously calculated to delay the proceedings, generate sympathy from undecided community members, and position herself as the fragile victim rather than the powerful aggressor. However, the community had been watching her behavior and tactics for far too long to fall for such transparent manipulation. Instead of the concern rushing to her aid that she clearly expected, people rolled their eyes, checked their phones, and made skeptical comments to their neighbors. Someone in the back actually laughed out loud. The spell that she had cast over our neighborhood through fear and intimidation was finally irreversibly breaking. My counter-presentation was methodical, factual, and absolutely devastating in its comprehensive destruction of her lies. I started with video evidence of her criminal trespassing, properly authenticated, time-stamped, and showing clearly that she had committed felony crimes while claiming to enforce community regulation. Then came the financial audit results that Maria Santos had helped us compile. $47,000 in unexplained deposits into her personal bank accounts over the past 2 years, with timelines that matched her violation campaigns with mathematical precision. The testimony from her previous victims established a clear pattern of predatory behavior that had destroyed multiple families across different communities. Dr. Vance's emotional account of losing her veterinary practice brought several people to tears. George Hendrick's insider testimony about the systematic nature of her targeting provided crucial context about her methods and motivations. Finally, my federal contractor documentation proved beyond any doubt that my business wasn't just completely legal, but was actually contributing to community safety through professional law enforcement training. As I presented each piece of evidence, I could see the room's atmosphere shifting like weather changing before a storm. Neighbors were connecting dots they had suspected but never been able to confirm. Board members were taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. Even some of Deborah's most vocal supporters looked increasingly uncomfortable as the mounting evidence made denial impossible. The financial charts were particularly effective. You didn't need an accounting degree to understand the correlation between her fining campaigns and her personal spending sprees. But the ultimate twist that no one saw coming emerged from the person everyone least expected. Marcus Clifton, who had been sitting silently in the back row throughout the entire meeting, looking increasingly uncomfortable, suddenly stood up and walked purposefully to the front of the room. The entire assembly fell completely silent as he approached the microphone, and you could have heard a pin drop as he faced his wife for what was clearly a long overdue confrontation that had been building for months or possibly years. "I need to say something that I should have said a long time ago," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of months of internal struggle and moral conflict. "I've been gathering evidence of what my wife has been doing to this community, and I cannot stand by and watch this anymore. She has destroyed enough innocent families, and it ends tonight." The shock rippled through the room like an earthquake as people realized that her own husband was about to testify against her. He handed comprehensive folders to the HOA board president, my attorney, and the investigating journalist. Those contained bank statements showing systematic theft from HOA funds, forged violation reports with altered dates and amounts, financial records proving she's been funding our lifestyle with money extorted from our neighbors, and recorded conversations where she admits to deliberately targeting families she thinks won't fight back effectively. His voice grew stronger and more confident as he spoke, like he was finally relieving himself of a burden he'd been carrying for far too long. The revelation that her own husband had been secretly documenting her crimes and was prepared to testify against her in court broke something fundamental in Deborah's carefully constructed psychological facade. She completely lost her composure in front of the entire community, alternating between blaming Marcus for betraying her, blaming me for corrupting him, blaming the system for not supporting her authority, and making increasingly desperate and incoherent attempts to justify behavior that was now clearly documented as systematic criminal fraud. "You people don't understand the pressure and responsibility of maintaining property values in this community," she screamed at one point, her perfect makeup running with tears of rage and desperation. These people would destroy everything we've worked for if someone didn't keep them in line. I was protecting all of you. Her complete meltdown was being broadcast live on local news and recorded by dozens of cell phones, ensuring that her final performance would be preserved for posterity. The HOA board vote was unanimous for her immediate removal as president and from the board entirely. Criminal charges were filed that very night for embezzlement, trespassing, fraud, harassment, and abuse of municipal authority. A complete audit was ordered for all HOA finances over the past 5 years, and full refunds were mandated for all the bogus fines she had issued, funded by the recovery of stolen money from her personal account. The new HOA leadership, elected democratically by the community rather than appointed through her manipulation and intimidation tactics, immediately began implementing transparency measures and proper oversight procedures to prevent any similar corruption from ever happening again. As I stood at the front of that packed room, looking out at neighbors who were finally free from years of fear and manipulation, I felt a sense of vindication that went far beyond personal satisfaction. We hadn't just exposed one corrupt individual. We had dismantled an entire system of abuse and replaced it with something based on actual justice and community cooperation. In this HOA, the law had been Karen for far too long. But tonight, we had proven that real law and real justice were stronger than fear, manipulation, and corruption. Epilogue, a new community. 6 months after that historic HOA meeting, I'm still training police K9 in my backyard. But now the sound of commands and barking dogs represents community safety rather than neighborhood controversy. Instead of harassment and violations, I receive regular visits from neighbors bringing homemade cookies and fresh coffee during training sessions. Parents frequently ask if their children can watch the dogs work to learn about police procedures and animal behavior. What was once a source of conflict has become a point of community pride that we're home to professional law enforcement training that keeps our region safer. Deborah's criminal trial made regional and eventually national news as a textbook example of HOA corruption and the dangers of unchecked authority in residential communities. Legal scholars now cite her case in academic papers about municipal fraud, and her systematic embezzlement scheme is studied in law enforcement training programs as an example of white-collar crime hiding behind official authority. The financial investigation ultimately revealed that she had stolen over $75,000 from various HOA communities over a 5-year period, funding a lifestyle completely beyond her family's legitimate means. Meadowbrook Heights has become something of a model community for proper HOA governance with transparent financial reporting, democratic decision-making processes, and genuine concern for property values through community cooperation rather than fear-based enforcement. Property values have actually increased significantly since the elimination of Deborah's reign of terror. As families feel secure, investing in improvements and new residents are attracted to a neighborhood known for its ethical leadership and community cooperation. My K9 training business has expanded to serve 3 counties, and I regularly speak at community meetings, law enforcement conferences, and HOA governance seminars about recognizing and preventing the kind of systematic abuse that nearly destroyed our neighborhood. The most rewarding part isn't the professional recognition or even the business growth. It's seeing communities learn to protect themselves from predators who hide behind positions of authority. Last week, something happened that perfectly captured how much our community has changed. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, whose family lives 3 houses down from me, appeared at my back gate during a training session, carrying a hand-drawn card. My mom said, "You're the reason our neighborhood is safe now," she told me with the serious expression that only children can manage. "I made you a thank you card because you and your dogs are hero." The crayon drawing showed stick figures of me and Rex standing guard over a row of houses under a rainbow, with "thank you for keeping us safe" written in carefully formed letters across the top. The most important lesson from this entire experience isn't about standing up to bullies or fighting corruption, though both of those things certainly matter. It's about the incredible power that emerges when communities choose courage over fear, truth over convenience, and justice over the easier path of just hoping someone else will solve the problem. When neighbors decide to support each other instead of hiding behind closed doors, when professionals use their skills to serve justice instead of just personal profit. And when ordinary people refuse to let bullies destroy the places they call home, truly amazing transformations become possible. Marcus Clifton filed for divorce the day after the HOA meeting, and their assets remained frozen throughout the criminal proceedings. He eventually thanked me privately for giving him the courage to do what he knew was right, explaining that he had been documenting her behavior for months, but didn't know how to stop it without destroying his own family. Watching you stand up to her showed me that sometimes doing the right thing requires taking risks. He told me I should have acted sooner, but I'm grateful we finally stopped her before she's destroyed any more families. Dr. Patricia Vance has reopened her veterinary practice in a new location with proper HOA protections, and she regularly volunteers her time to help other communities identify and prevent similar abuse. Jerry Walsh and the other families from Deborah's previous neighborhood have become advocates for HOA reform legislation at the state level. Maria Santos, the former bookkeeper, has started a consulting business helping communities implement proper financial oversight for their homeowner associations. Officer Riley Thompson received a commendation for her professional handling of the investigation and has been promoted to detective, specializing in white-collar crime and municipal corruption. She still stops by occasionally to see how the dogs are progressing in their training, and she's become something of a neighborhood hero herself for her role in exposing the corruption that was poisoning our community. In this HOA, the law used to be Karen, an arbitrary self-serving system based on fear, manipulation, and personal profit disguised as community protection. But now our community operates under what law should always be fair, transparent, accountable, and designed to serve the genuine interests of the people rather than the ego and bank account of whoever happens to be holding the clipboard and measuring tape at any given moment. And honestly, I still cannot understand how anyone could possibly think they could jump the fence of a police K-9 trainer's property and not face serious consequences for their actions. But hey, at least I got enough material from this suburban warfare experience to fill what should definitely become a streaming series about ordinary people fighting back against petty tyrants and the communities that find the courage to support them. That kind of victory is worth celebrating. Even if it took 3 police dogs, a suburban surveillance operation, and an underground resistance movement to achieve it, sometimes justice comes in the most unexpected packages, delivered by the very people who thought they were above it. The sound of Rex's training commands echoing through my backyard isn't just about preparing dogs for police work anymore. It's the sound of a community that learned to protect itself and chose courage over fear. And that more than any individual victory is a legacy worth building and a story worth telling.